resources to drive either the board and the management functions of the pension fund. So we provide advisory in that space. Finet Institute is a training arm of Finet Trust and primarily focusing on pension management programs, trustee induction and management, strategic planning and policy formulation, corporate governance, risk management, as well as also financial literacy for especially members who are either still in employment or those who are about to leave employment. We also do a bit of change management and pre-retirement trainings. If your scheme is in-house managed, so perhaps you may have an opportunity to deploy technology to your fund, especially to manage data and also to coordinate communication and documents within your scheme. So we are also heavy in technology. And most importantly, on employee benefits, we do have a Finet insurance agency that deals with employee benefits such as pension, annuities, income drawdowns, as well as also advisory on the larger pension consulting. That is now the issues of setting up of pension schemes, issues of liquidation, and also different advisory mechanisms that as a pension fund you may find yourself engaging in. So just to highlight our mission as a business is to ensure that we leverage on the expertise within the industry, coming from both the individuals within the organization and also the industry at large, and to impart new skills and new thinking to either the boards of trustees and also the members of the different pension funds. And we aim just to provide best advice and future thinking. And our mantra is just building to a better day today. We are building a better tomorrow today, but also importantly, we want to leverage on collaborations within the industry and provide new innovative thinking. So in terms of existence, we are barely 12 months in business. We've been able to train more than 700 trustees since inception and also engage with close to 189 pension schemes so far in the industry on different consulting and also training arrangements. We do have monthly trainings within the business, and you will appreciate that as trustees, part of capacity building comes from the continuous learning and development. And therefore, you will find that we have a training calendar that runs the whole year in different thematic areas. We have a staff complement of 10 with 15 years average combined experience, and we both do local and international programs within our training calendar as Finet Institute. Perhaps just to show in terms of pictures, we are located at Dafton Court, that is Riverside Drive. We also have existing relationship and collaborations with the Institute of Certified Secretaries, which is aimed at promoting governance within the pension industry. And we, of course, have done both local and international programs since we engage. The next slides will show you a couple of the clients we've engaged with. Perhaps some of them you may be aware, and some of us who have joined may be coming from these organizations. So those are the sample clients we have been able to engage. So perhaps I just want to Captain raise on the discussions for today on why trustee orientation and induction. And we appreciate all of us for joining in this forum, because it means then we are aspiring to learn something new with regards to pension management. First of all, we want to appreciate that as trustees, sometimes we may not be experts in our pension, but we are expected to make decisions that will impact our members. Also, it will have a direct impact with our sponsors, and also by extension, the stakeholders, be it the regulator and the service providers. And in any board, they normally say that great boards is about great decisions. So if you are looking about making decisions that are sustainable to the fund, it means then you must have a great mix of the people who drive that conversations. So it boils down to the governance around the decision making, because then that will also lay the foundation for building structures, building systems, getting the right people to drive conversation within the pension scheme. And therefore, our induction engagement is basically trying to enhance the decision making within the boards by first understanding the primary concepts of how or what does it entail to become a trustee. And some of the critical areas that we normally grapple with as a new trustee or even as an ongoing trustee is continuously understanding what are our roles within the scheme. Our roles are defined legally, and also there are those that are implied as a trustee. However, you also have specific duties and functions that you need to discharge as a trustee. Those ones are provided for in different instruments that you have within the scheme. However, within all that, there are also rights and limitations that may come within the broader context of the powers and the roles you have as trustees. And the critical point would be, how do you discharge your mandate within the law? There's also quite a lot of engagements when it comes to the board dynamics. Sometimes the decision making or the significance of the decisions you make are as a result of interaction with the different stakeholders you have within the scheme. And in most cases, you may find that the relationships you have with your sponsor, amongst your trustees, with the service providers, or even with the regulators, can sometimes bring a divergence, or it can bring concurrence when it comes to the level of decision making that you have as a board. So therefore, how do we then manage the dynamics of the boards within the roles we have, the functions we have, and the responsibilities that comes within the board? I also want to elaborate the fact that as trustees, we are supposed to provide strategic decisions. And strategic decisions in this case means then you are seated.
Sunday and Sunday, like Monday.
Sorry, there's an interruption from someone. I think we can mute.
Okay. Well, now to begin with, I think we'll be.
Hi, Jen. Please mute your.
I mean, into the promote.
Just mute your microphone.
Around you training.
All right, thank you very much. So we're saying that when it comes to the trustees, you're supposed to be making strategic decisions that affect.
No, they are aware. They are the ones who confirmed they want to attend the conference.
However, the decisions are normally leaders or the secretariat. So discharging your mandate either as a new trustee or a continuing trustee, the bigger question is normally, how do you know and respect the jurisdiction between strategic decisions you are making as a board and the operational decisions you have? And in most cases, you find that there's normally the golden rule for any board that your nose should be in your finger and your fingers should be out in terms of their deliberations. So we want to enhance and ask ourselves then, how do we ensure that as a board, we are not doing operational mandates rather than providing strategic oversight within the board? We are also supposed to be accountable and take full responsibility for the roles we have. As trustees, you find that most of our roles are delegative. You delegate most of them to the service providers, or you rely on expert advice from the different service providers. But then you are supposed to be accountable as a trustee. Case in point, you have the power to invest, but you'll have to perhaps contract an investment manager as per regulations to provide the investments. But if in any point the investments does not provide the desired results from the investments do not meet the expected results, then you find that members will actually put you into account. And therefore, we need to ensure that we continuously look at what is it within our mandate that we can discharge, but within the accountability mechanisms. So ensuring that your service providers have clear accountability and also clear instruments of discharging or delegating mandates are very critical to the board. I think I want also to note that the other critical thing that as a board we need to be looking into when it comes to discharging our mandate is the aspect that from the experience that we've had, and also from the first golden rule, is that we are first leaders. We are first either in management we are either leaders within our organizations before we are enrolled into trustee board. Because in most cases, you find the sponsor nominates trustees. The members also elect the trustees into the board. And when it comes to the engagements of trustee and nomination, you'll find that members will elect you into the board because you are a person of influence. And the sponsor will nominate you because in most cases, you are either in the top leadership. So the first golden expectation is that you are a leader before even you become a trustee. And therefore, when you come to the board, then the expectation is that you are a steward. You are the servant leader providing services to the scheme. And you'll agree with me that in most cases, you find that trustees are not heavily remunerated as maybe we expect. But in most cases, our risks and our obligations are actually large. So that brings in now the element of strategic leadership, the conversations about the great boards making great decisions is all about who is in the board and what do they bring into the board. The other thing that as a new trustee that you may need to look into and also strategically align yourself is the aspect of strategic management. We manage members' funds in most cases. We are expected to bring or to optimize the returns from these members. Members expect the highest level of communication. We are also expected to innovate as a fund or as trustees. So the question is that within the resources we have, how do we then optimize results from each and every KPI area or key result area that we have as a trustee? There's also the context of strategic thinking, meaning trustees normally have to juggle a lot of information. They get a lot of information from different parties within the scheme, service providers, the sponsor, and also amongst yourself, and also what you learn from different forums. So the question would be then, how do you apply strategic thinking in looking at how then can you get the best options to deliver the maximum result as a board? So as trustees, we find ourselves in always having to deal with complex relationships, but also having to come up with a decision that would ideally be providing the best outcome to the board. So the other bit which is also crucial is the element of strategic innovation, because innovation goes hand in hand when it comes to competitive advantage. There are so many pension funds currently in the industry, close to 1,100. Most of these pension funds are actually competing either amongst themselves or with the external environment, looking for opportunities. And you find that pension funds, for example, in the capital market space, they are looking for assets to either invest in to maximize returns. Or when it comes to operational level, we are competing with aspects of technology to look at what is the best technology that we can deploy, either to enhance service delivery to our members or to enhance communication to our members. We are also aware that the dynamics keep changing every day in terms of the ecosystem, the macro, the micro aspects. You have changes in regulations that come through unusual occurrences like COVID, for example, the wars that the global wars that we have, and they affect the basics of what we do deal with as a scheme. So as trustees, you must be able to always have that innovative mindset to look at what is new, how can we adjust as a board, and how can we take advantage of it. And then, of course, what is crucial as well is, other than the aspect of leading, there is also the crucial aspect of execution. Meaning, in all contexts, your work does not end from a boardroom conversation. They now have to translate to actual activities or actual actions that will yield these results. Most of them you delegate, most of them you oversee. So the question would be, do we have enough strategic oversight tools as trustees to ensure that our vision, our mission as a fund is actually actualized within the board? But then, of course, as well, also, you need to have corrective actions when it comes to the risks that you may have. So it means then you may be able to have the possible risks or a robust risk management framework that will identify critical areas that as trustees you need to focus on, and in the event they do not actualize, or in the event and risk occurs, then what would be the possible mechanisms that you can adopt to mitigate it, or avoid those kind of risks. So as a board, the strategic themes then you need to inculcate as you come on board, or as you continue as a trustee, would be to look at those critical areas and look at how then can you define or bring the best out of your boards. And then in perspective, I would want to say that since we are all leaders in the context of scheme pension management, we normally say that as individuals, the leaders who do most harm to most organizations are the ones who stop learning, and sometimes you think you've arrived and you stop innovating or improving. And I want to encourage all of us to align to the context that as trustees, you have to shuffle so much information and make the decisions that are long-term, especially to your members. And therefore, we need to start thinking outside the box. What is it that we can do better? What is it that can go wrong? What is it that as a scheme, if I were managing these funds as myself, how could you have done differently? And therefore, thinking in visions comes in handy, thinking in congestion in terms of the information you have, thinking in time, because sometimes you take long to make a decision as a board, but then you miss out an opportunity. Also in resources, as schemes grow and as the fund sizes grow, you find that opportunities may expand in line with the growth in resources you have. Or if your resources are minimal, then how do you optimize the best that can come into that? Also, thinking in life cycles is very crucial because times and seasons change, especially when it comes to the journey of your employees, or also the journey of your tenure as trustees. And therefore, it means then having robust business continuity plans, having robust succession plans as a board comes in handy. Sometimes you fear making decisions as trustees, but as leaders, you may have to appreciate that sometimes we need to experiment for us to learn. We need to think about what can we do differently in investments. Can we deploy, for example, WhatsApp to our members, and SMS engagement to our members? Can we sometimes benchmark with international or local other schemes? So sometimes those experiential aspects that comes in within the board can help achieve the desired objectives. And I want just to wrap it up by saying that successful leaders never stop learning. That's according to Tom Wood. And therefore, this session on trustee induction and orientation, we believe it will be of crucial help in terms of demystifying any issue that you may want to learn in terms of either be it your foundational concepts of trusteeship, but also importantly on strategic areas that affect your fund. And I normally say there are five critical areas that as a trustee board, that should be your focus on. And the first one, of course, is to make sure that the investments of your members are at optimum in terms of the results and also protection of the capital that the members have put in. The second one is to ensure that the service delivery to your members is at optimum by looking at the efficiency of your service delivery, be it on payments, updating members, communication, and all that. The third one is to ensure that the level of participation of your members is high, members owning and also appreciating why the scheme exists. Then the other bit is to ensure that your governance structures are intact, looking at how the evolution of your structures, your processes, your systems, how have you been able to provide for within the trustee board, and also the documentations that you have as a board. And then, of course, the last bit is compliance, asking ourselves as to whether we are complying with the requirements of the legal frameworks that we have. because schemes are heavily regulated. So I just want to then conclude at that level, and perhaps now officially open up with Mr. Calvin Nyachoti, who will now take us through the foundational aspects. And I want to wish you a great learning this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Godwin, for that short, well-articulated presentation. I'm sure it was very necessary as we have this conversation on trusteeship. So I've seen we've been joined by quite a number of people. Karibuni sana. So we're just sticking to the agenda. And I can see from the chat box, Sendeo, you've said that the presentation is not very clear. It's intermittent. I wonder whether it's the internet at your end or mine. I think maybe it could be from your end because the rest, I've not had complaints on that, but we can address it in case they come up. All right, so I can see Mr. Calvin Nyachoti is very ready to proceed. Allow me to just introduce him shortly, and then we can go ahead. All right, please confirm you can see the screen from your end.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So Mr. Nyachoti is going to be taking us through the topical areas of the day, and he's an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, a chartered arbitrator, an accredited mediator, adjudicator, and a certified corporate secretary. So he's also the Corporation Secretary and Director of Legal Services at KNH. He's a chairman at Kitengela International Schools, Director of the National Adoption Committee, and CPS Governance Center Limited. Is a founder, member, and director on the Women's on Boards Networks, member of the Committee of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and trustee on the KNH, SRBS, among others. So he's a seasoned trainer. We've trained with him before, and he consults and trains on dispute resolution. That is the management and regulation of retirement benefits, corporate governance, and institutional development. So I'm sure with his wealth of knowledge, is going to be the best person to take us through the topical areas of the day. Please feel free to engage him. Let's utilize the chat box and raise our hands if need be. So Calvin, karibu sana, you can take it over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aurelia, and thank you, Godwin, for setting the stage. I believe you can hear me well, and my screen is visible. Aurelia, kindly confirm.
Yes, we can hear you well.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you, and welcome to this virtual workshop. Our topic today is trusteeship, and under this we'll be looking at the duties, the responsibilities, and we'll finish off the discussion with looking at the key players within the retirement benefit industry. Thank you for the introduction. I think I'd just like to say that I've since left one or two of those organizations, and that is the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, where I've since retired, and also the National Adoptions Committee. But thank you very much, nonetheless, for that introduction. I want to thank Gordon for having set the stage on what we'll be talking about today. And as he said, we will be addressing the foundational aspects of being a trustee. This is meant to be an induction, which gives us the presupposition that we want to really build a solid foundation for those who have since joined the retirement benefit industry, and it helps you to become a solid trustee and help you to serve the scheme membership, the sponsor, among other things, and gives you a very good basic understanding of how trusts work. My presentation today will focus on trusts within the context of retirement benefits arrangement. It will not be about family trust. It will not be about charitable or uncharitable trusts, but it will be within the context of trust within the retirement benefit sector. In terms of what we will cover this morning, we will run with 1, understanding trusteeship. 2 is understanding the law behind the creation of trusts, the duties and the responsibilities, delegation of duties, and then discretion, some challenges that face trustees, the question of liability, and then we'll finish off with good practices as well as the players within the industry. In between, I welcome you to put your questions on the chat function. When we do take a break, we'll be happy to respond to your questions that you've raised in the course of the discussion. And we will also at the very end have a question and answer where you can verbalize your question or comment for us to be able to attempt to respond to it. So without further ado, allow me to just begin right away. And what is trusteeship? What is trusteeship and the circumstances under which we become trustees? Now, trusteeship has become more complex by the day. And it has become more complex by the day because trusteeship has been given an additional responsibilities over time. Initially, it was simple, that you are holding, managing the assets on behalf of another. You are not paid, you are not, the relationship didn't have too many requirements. But increasingly, because of the nature it has taken, particularly within the pension industry, then we will look at trusteeship in a more complicated setup, and what are those duties, the responsibilities, and what does it take in order to be able to serve that. Now, what is a trust? I think it's a good place to start answering what is trusteeship. What is a trust to begin with? A trust basically is an equitable obligation binding one person who is the trustee, who holds and deals with property that he has control over, and that's called the trust property, for the benefit of a third party called the beneficiary or the member in this case, of whom he may be himself one or is just doing it for the benefit of that other third person. So a trust relationship precisely anticipates a three-way relationship. The trustee who is holding the property, the trust property itself, and then the beneficiary who is the ultimate beneficiary or the beneficial owner of what is being held. So the trustee, the sponsor or the creator of the trust, and then the beneficiary themselves. So in a typical relationship within an occupational scheme, the sponsor is the employer who creates a trust in the form of a retirement benefit scheme. They appoint the trustees, or the trustees are elected. The trustees hold the property and manage it for the benefit of the third person, who is the member or the beneficiary. Now, why is it that employers establish retirement benefit schemes? Or more precisely, why are retirement benefit schemes established in the form of trust and not in the form of a company, a SACCO, or any other business name or business formation that there is? Why is it that they are always established either through an act of parliament or through a trust? One, it is to separate the assets of the sponsor from the assets of the scheme, so that the employer does not deal with scheme money as if it was the employer's money. Number two, a trust arrangement is the most favorable legal instrument under which you can establish a scheme because it creates a separate legal entity, separate from the employer, registered as a company or a corporation or otherwise. Number three is that a trust allows you to appoint someone today to hold and manage property for the benefit of a third party, and that third party can enforce that right. And then finally, the reason why we choose trusts is because trusts have certain tax incentives. And in brief, if I can just sum it up to a certain amount, and that amount is 20,000 shillings, when you contribute to a retirement benefit scheme, that money is tax exempt for purposes of computing how much tax you will be paying. That way, it encourages people, one, to belong to a scheme and to contribute to that scheme. So that tax incentive is in itself very useful, and they're one of the reasons why schemes are established as retirement benefit schemes. The second part of tax incentives is that when it comes to accessing your money, the rate of taxation that is applicable to retirement benefits is staggered and less than would be applicable in a typical income earning scenario. And for that reason, it encourages people to save for retirement and then to access their money, typically in the form of a pension over a period. Now, what do you require for you to be a good trustee? I'm speaking to trustees mainly. What is it that makes you a good trustee? We'll build up the conversation, but at the simplest level, you simply require to have common sense. They say common sense is not as common as we think. That may be true, but a trustee must have, at the basic level, just common sense. Number two, you must be a person of integrity and who is ready and willing to exercise prudence and due diligence in the execution of your duties. So integrity is very, very key. And the third and the final set of skills that you require is knowledge about your duties. And this discussion today is meant to equip you with the tools, with the duties, with the responsibilities, just with the knowledge. And then it's also meant to advise you how to exercise your discretion in the best interest of the scheme. Now, as we talk about trusts, as we talk about why employers use them, as we talk about what skills do you need, it is important to also appreciate what laws are in place that create about a trust relationship. I'll start that at a basic level. The Trustee Perpetual Succession Act of 1980, which is Cap 164, anticipates the creation of trusts and the registration of trusts. Number two, the Trustees Act also makes provision for the creation and registration of trusts. And then more specifically, the Retirement Benefits Act of 97, as amended over the years and together with its regulations, is also a good tool for the creation of trusts within the retirement benefit environment. We also have the National Social Security Fund, created in 1965, repealed, and we now have a new NSSF Act of 2013. It also creates a trust arrangement. And then finally, and importantly, is if you want to get laws and information and guidance in terms of how to manage, how to create, how to regulate trusts, one of the most important sources is case law. Our Kenyan courts have over the years decided cases, but these cases are supplemented or by previously decided English cases, which say this is what a trust is, and this is how it's meant to be managed or administered. So case law is important in the discussion of what a trust is and the law that guides and governs the management of trusts. Now, who then are the trustees or who may be trustees? I'm speaking to most of you who are trustees and some who may not be. But even for those who are, how did you end up as a trustee? The answer to this question is in the following possible sets of answers. One, you are a trustee. So the employer, the sponsor, or the creator of the trust has nominated you to become a trustee in the retirement benefit scheme. The second option on how you may have become a trustee or you can become a trustee is you're an individual, you're a member of staff, and you have been elected by the members of the scheme to become a member of the board of trustees of your pension scheme. The third option is, as you've seen, it is possible to serve as an independent trustee who has been chosen by the sponsor to sit on the board of an occupational retirement benefit scheme board of trustees. So I have had the privilege of serving the local authority pension trust, that's LAP Trust, as a trustee and as the chair, and I was there in my capacity as an individual independent trustee. And the fourth option is as a corporate trustee. A corporate trustee, as the name suggests, is a company which was established for purposes of offering trustee services to those who may need. And you are thus appointed, and the employer maintains the discretion to choose whether to have individuals who form a board of trustees or whether to appoint a company which then offers trustee services. That discretion vests with the employer, and many times they can choose either. But for the vast majority of schemes in this country, the employer has allowed its employees who are members of the scheme to elect trustees, and the employer has also allowed or nominated trustees to that board. Then finally, another way in which you can exercise trustee responsibilities is if the Retirement Benefits Authority deems it fit that the current trustee is not properly executing his or the board's responsibilities, they might remove that corporate trustee or the board of trustees from office. When they remove the board of trustees from office, they replace them with an interim administrator. That interim administrator is either an individual or an organization, a company which has been tasked with the responsibilities of managing and running the trust for the time being. So those are the number of ways in which you may become a trustee. Now, who is it that cannot be a trustee? We've looked at how can you become a trustee, but what is it that can rule you out of being a trustee of a retirement benefit scheme? The first answer is if you've been imprisoned for a period of more than 6 months, you are not eligible to serve as a trustee. Number two, if you've been bankrupt or you are currently bankrupt and are discharged bankrupt, you can't serve as a member of a board of trustees. The third point is if you've been previously involved in the management or rather mismanagement of a scheme and the scheme has failed or been registered, then you cannot run as a member of a board of trustees. And then finally is if you're disqualified by any other law. Now, what other law could disqualify someone? Very different scenarios. The Insolvency Act, the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act talks about bankrupts. The Children's Act talks about who is a child and the things they can do and can't do. So you can't be a trustee if you're of tender age or below the age of majority. If you're a mentally unsound person, you can't be a trustee. Those are some of the issues or some of the aspects which can disqualify a trustee. Now, there are two types of retirement benefit schemes, and you can ask yourself, what is your type of retirement benefit schemes? And it is altogether possible to get one sponsor or one employer who actually has both types of retirement benefit schemes. So the first one is a defined benefit scheme. A defined benefit scheme is the traditional older scheme where you were promised a benefit and not the contribution. You are given a promise that you work, then at the point of retirement, we will pay you this promised benefit. The benefit is a formula, and that formula is calculated. It is a calculation based on the number of years you've served, your last salary, and a pension factor. All right. So it will be calculated and you will be paid at the point when you exit. Now, for that type of retirement benefit scheme, it needs between 3 to 9 trustees if you're going to form a board of trustees, or like I said, the employer has discretion to choose one corporate trustee. Now, if they choose individual trustees to form a board of trustees, then at least a third of them have to be elected by the members and 2/3 come from the sponsor. Now, why is that structure tilted so that 1/3 comes from the members and 2/3 comes from the sponsor? Because in defined benefit schemes, it is the sponsor who carries the investment risk. They have given you a promise that they will pay you. You don't have to worry about how they will be able to pay you. They will, if they do well and there's a surplus, it is a good thing for them. If the scheme doesn't do well and there's a deficit, they are bound to take care of it. And for that reason, they're allowed 2/3 of the members, while the members are allowed 1/3 representation. The second type of a scheme is the defined contribution scheme. And in this case, unlike the first one, what you have been promised, or what is clear, what has been defined, is the contribution rate. So you will be contributing X percentage of your pay, and that's what is defined. How much it's going to be at the end of the day, no one knows, because it will determine on how much you've contributed, how much the sponsor has contributed, and your investment returns over the period of contribution. Now, under this kind of scheme, the liability is with the member. And for that reason, it has between 4 to 8 trustees, and half of them are nominated by the sponsor, and the other half is elected by the membership of the scheme. You have been elected or you've been nominated by the sponsor. Once that has happened, then you have to be appointed. And the appointment, unless it's the first appointment, is supposed to happen, or you're supposed to get a letter of appointment from the trust secretary. If it's a first appointment, then you will get it from the sponsor. But beyond nomination and election, there has to be appointment where you're formally recognized as having been elected or nominated, and you've been appointed into the scheme. Now, let's talk about how you run your meetings. You've been appointed as a trustee. How do you run your meetings? Now, the law requires, initially, provided that you shall have at least 4 meetings in a year. But a couple of years ago, I think 2018, it was the Retirement Benefits Act was amended to say that the trustee shall meet a minimum of 2 times in a year. And remember, what is defined is the minimum, not the maximum. So you can meet more times than twice. Typically, most schemes meet a minimum of 4 times in a year. And the second thing is that there should be no more than 3 months between one meeting and the next. So don't wait until December to hold all your 2 meetings or your 4 meetings. You need to hold a meeting once every quarter. Trustees who've been appointed into office are appointed for a term, and that term is anything up to 3 years. Now, and you can serve a maximum term of 2 terms, meaning you're eligible to serve for a maximum period of 6 years as a trustee in a scheme. Now, there have been a lot of questions about this capping and whether it is healthy, good at their task, and what does it mean when you lose them, the cost of trade. I do not have a specific response to those concerns, but only to say that perhaps there's also good merit that you need fresh blood in an organization every so often, new ideas, new ways of doing things, and it is also possible for everyone else to learn so that we do a good job in terms of securing our funds as members of these schemes. The chairman of the scheme is typically selected or elected by his colleagues who form the board of trustees. And they're the ones who choose who then becomes the chair of the pension. The scheme is supported administratively by one or two options. The first one is by a trust secretary who is appointed by the trustees, or it is altogether possible to have, there's a bit of noise in the background. I don't know if it's possible to mute it, Aurelia.
All right, that's fine. And just to interrupt, we have a hand raised from Michael Gitiga. So I don't know if you finish the slide first and then you address it, or you can take it up.
Let me just say something small and then I can take it up. So, and then the second option is to have an internal, to outsource the scheme administration to a scheme administrator, one of the registered scheme administrators under the Retirement Benefits Act. So those are the two options: internal administration or external scheme administration. Anthony, please go ahead, Gidiga.
It's Michael Gitiga. You can go ahead and present your question.
Gidiga, please go ahead.
Well, I think maybe he clicked the hand raised by mistake because I've seen the chat box, sorry. Anyway, that's fine. Sorry about that. You can proceed, Calvin.
All right, thank you very much. So this is perhaps a good point to pause and take any comment that any of you may have at this point. Is there any question, any comment that we have before we go to the next topic, which is the duties, the powers and discretion of trustees? Do we have any comment, any question? Okay, I do not see any.
Yeah, there's none from the chat box, but in case of anything, I'll interrupt if need be.
Okay, thank you very much. So now I want to talk about the duties, the powers, and the responsibilities of trustees. And I am more than happy to hear what your thoughts are on these responsibilities. So we want to distinguish the different aspects, and the first one is the duty. What is a duty? It is a task which a person is bound to perform, either for legal or for moral reason. So you either have a legal duty to do something or a moral duty. Parents raise their children both because of moral reasons, but also because of legal responsibilities. A trustee has a duty in law, once they have accepted to become a trustee, to do certain things for the benefit of the members and beneficiaries of the scheme. What is a power? A power is the authority to do something. For example, the power to invest. You have a power to go out into the market, find a fund manager, instruct them, and let them invest, and you oversee the investment. The third item is responsibility, and this is a thing for which a person is accountable. What is it you're accountable for, and who is it you're accountable to? So responsibility is different from a duty in the sense that you can delegate one and you cannot delegate the other. Now, you can delegate the duty, which is the task. For example, trustees routinely delegate custodial services to registered custodians to keep the money on behalf of the scheme. But they maintain the responsibility as to whether that is done and done correctly. So you cannot delegate the responsibility, you can only delegate the duty. And then finally, discretion. What is discretion? It is the power to make a choice. To make a choice, for instance, if a member nominated 2 children, and this is a while back, but by the time he passes on, you realize he has 4 children. Do you go ahead and say, no, we will only cater to the nominated 2 children, or do we recognize all the members' children? So the trustees have discretion to look into that scenario and say it is in the best interest to take care of 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of just 1 and 2. So that is discretion, the power to make a choice, a well-guided, well-considered choice in the best interest of the scheme and its membership. All right, now we've understood what our duty is, what our responsibility is, we've understood what discretion is. Now, what are some of the duties of a trustee? What is it that you need to do once you're in office? Now, a lot of you are in office. What is it you're doing or meant to be doing? The first one is you must act in accordance with the trusted and rules. Like I said, schemes are set up in only 2 ways, either through a trusted and rules or through an act of parliament. Now, whichever, you must act either according to that act of parliament or according to the trusted and rules. Number 2, you must act in the best interest of the beneficiary. While you're the legal owner of the money and you're managing the money on behalf of members and their beneficiaries, you have an obligation to act in the best interest of the members and their beneficiaries. Number 3 is to act with reasonable care. So reasonable care and diligence. Do not say, I did not know, it was your responsibility to know. Do not say it wasn't clear, it is your responsibility to be clear. So you must exercise your duties and your responsibilities with reasonable care, skill, and diligence. You must also act impartially. If there is a situation and you have 2 members and the situation is the same, the way you treat member 1 is the same way you should treat member 2. You need to act impartially as amongst the beneficiary. You need to act gratuitously, meaning in the best interest of the person that you're acting. And you need to act jointly. You work together as a group. You are a board of trustees. No one trustee is superior to the others. You act jointly, you act together as trustees. You have an obligation not only to act in the best interest, but also to avoid conflicts of interest. So avoid any interest that may take you away from acting in the best interest of the scheme. And conflicts of interest are usually to self or to a third party who is not a member or a beneficiary. And then you have a duty to have knowledge of the scheme and to act according to the knowledge you have of that scheme, and to manage the scheme effectively, efficiently, and in the best interest of the members. Those are some of the duties which a trustee has. But just to top it up, you have a responsibility to act and manage the scheme properly. And what is properly? Properly is in accordance with the trusted and rules, in accordance with the Retirement Benefits Act, in accordance with the regulations, and any direction that you may be given by the Retirement Benefits Authority. And you have to ensure that the scheme is managed in the best interest of the scheme and the sponsor. You have to report to the Retirement Benefits Authority if there is any reason why you think something is not being done well, and for that reason, it requires something different to be done. You have to report to the authority if you suspect that some people, the scheme or a service provider is acting in a manner that will be to the detriment of the retirement benefit scheme. Now, if scheme assets, and in particular contributions, remain unpaid for more than 30 days from the date that they are due, then you have a responsibility, one, to report to RBA and say that we've not been able to receive, or the scheme has not received its contributions. But more importantly, you have an obligation to take steps to realize that the funds which have not been remitted are actually remitted. Now, the law has been amended, and in the year 2020, it was amended to bring in an interesting provision, which is that you can get support from the Kenya Revenue Authority, KRA, if any of the contributions remains outstanding. They can help you collect those funds from the sponsor. I don't know within the forum how many trustees who may have fallen victim to delayed or non-remitted contributions, and how many among those have resorted to having the Kenya Revenue Authority assist you in the collection of these funds. I'm not sure because I've not seen any statistics in that respect. Now, disputes. You have an obligation as a trustee to make sure that you do not have any disputes with your members and service providers, but in case that there is, you need to engage with the members so that you resolve the dispute. If you don't resolve that dispute, the member is free, once they've exhausted the internal mechanism, to launch a complaint with the Retirement Benefits Authority. And RBA will look into the issue and will make or give directions. Once it gives direction, the scheme is bound and the trustees are bound to comply with the directions of the authority. If anyone is aggrieved by those directions, then you challenge those directions before the Retirement Benefits Appeals Tribunal. So there is an obligation to address issues relating to disputes that may arise with. Now, things can you do? Now, we've been looking at duties, but what powers do you have as a trustee? As a board of trustee, one, you can borrow money. If the board resolves that it's going to borrow money, you can do it. I know of a scheme that decided to invest in property, but they said it's not going to come from member contributions or the scheme assets. They said we will go to a bank, we will borrow money, we will invest in this property, and the property will pay for itself after we've invested. And that's what is happening. Number two, you have the power to invest assets on the scheme. So when you receive contributions, you can invest those contributions. So that's a power that the trustees have. The third one is you have a power to appoint service providers and any advisors that you may seek. So all schemes have appointed a custodian, they have appointed a fund manager, many have appointed an administrator, or they have their own internal administration, but they also have advisors, lawyers, auditors, surveyors, who advise the scheme as professionals. You have the power to augment your benefits. And what does this mean? If you find that maybe you're winding up a scheme and everyone has been paid what is due to them, but then there are some benefits remaining. Benefit augmentation presupposes a situation where you have more money than you need in the scheme. What you're then expected to do is you will use that surplus to beef up the benefits that each of the member is taking home. So if a member was due to get 10 million, but you have 100 million surplus in the scheme, then you take that 100 million and you divide it by the number of remaining members and you augment their benefits. Now, that particular power has to be read together with the power to refund the sponsor any excess. And so there are rules for refunding the sponsor a portion, but then the other portion is used for benefit augmentation of the member. Now, this typically happens only when the scheme is being wound up or being closed. And then finally is you have the power to amend the trust deed and rules, and you can only amend with the permission or with the consent of the sponsor. And it has to be registered with the retirement benefit. You also have the power to act by majority. What is it to act by majority? In the meetings that you hold as trustees, trustee decisions are either made unanimously, meaning you all agree, or the simple majority will carry the day. Meaning what? 50% plus 1, the majority side is what carries the day. So those are some of the powers of trustees. And you can exercise any of these powers depending on the situation at hand. Let me go to discretion. What are the discretion? First, what is discretion? We say discretion is the power to exercise choice. It is the ability to exercise choice in a situation. So what is the choice that trustees have? You have discretion, but you have to exercise that discretion in a fiduciary manner. And what is fiduciary? In the best interest of another. Now, Aurelia, perhaps you can mute for me the person whose mic is on. Okay, so you have discretion when it comes to who gets benefits. You have discretion in terms of augmenting benefits. It's not a must, but you have discretion to do it. You have discretion in accepting ill health retirement or early retirement. You have discretion in the appointment of advisors. You have discretion in waiving eligibility conditions or death in service benefits. What does it mean? It is to think through in exercising your fiduciary responsibilities and saying, we think it is best if we do one or the other. I want to stop there. I want to hand over back to Aurelia. We take our first us to be able to pick any questions that you may have. We respond to those questions. A second part of our conversation. Aurelia, may I invite you to step in up to that point? Aurelia?
Calvin, sorry about that. Come again, we're taking questions from the rest.
I've taken a pause. Yes, I've taken a pause so that we can take any questions. Thank you. And you lead the questions.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it's necessary we engage in terms of questions so that we can know what has not been addressed as at now. So do we have any questions from the rest of the group? Or I can start pointing out names. Well, there's a question from Keegan. So Kigan is asking, explain the role of borrowing monies again. So Calvin, you can note that down. Explain the role of borrowing monies.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Any other question? I can see we have many people who have already joined us. We have Carol Nzuki. Do you have any question for Calvin? We have Mr. James Obonyo. It doesn't have to be a question. We're also inviting comments. So let's interact more. Mr. Frederick Musoke, how are you doing? Are you with us? All right. So another question from Keegan is requesting for you to replay that slide of borrowing monies. Keegan, that is well noted. So Calvin has noted that down. He will address that issue shortly. So I've also seen another question from Sendeyo. Did Calvin say that the maximum number of trustees for a DC scheme is 8? So Calvin, I think you will address that as well. And then there's another question from the pension scheme secretary. Is asking, can a trustee second on an alternate to the BOT? Can a trustee second an alternate to the board of trustees? Okay, so we are inviting more questions before I allow Calvin to proceed. I think he's addressed some very key issues on trusteeship. Betty Yator, how are you doing today? All right, there's another question that just came in. So the next question is from Nora Kijala. She's asking, can the slides be shared for the benefit of those of us who joined in late? Oh yeah, that I can address. So after the training, we'll share the slides and the recorded version of the webinar. So that will be taken care of. All right, Calvin, you can address those few as we try get more from the chat box. That's okay?
Yes, that's perfectly okay. All right, so let me go back to the points that have been raised. So we are looking at. Let me start with the number. Let me just go back even further. All right. So yes, to answer the question very clearly, in a DB, the maximum is 9. In a DC, the maximum is 8.
All right, Moses, your microphone is on. Please mute it.
Yes, it is on.
Okay, I think the microphone is still on, Moses.
Yes.
Please mute so that we can proceed, or we have another Moses.
Moses, kindly mute your mic.
All right, you can proceed. I've muted from my end.
Okay. All right. So the question is on the number and the number of trustees, and so I want to just reiterate: in a DB scheme, the maximum is 9. It's 3 to 9. In a DC, it is 4 to 8. So that was the question, and yes, you're right. The maximum is 8. Let me go to the next slide, which had some questions, and that is the powers of trustees. Yes, you're right. If you read your trusted and rules, it gives you the power as trustees to borrow funds if you needed to borrow. Now, many schemes don't exercise this because many times schemes are generally liquid or can be liquid. And so many times schemes don't exercise that power, but it's a power you have. And I welcome you to read your own trusted and rules. You will find that the scheme has the power to borrow. And I was telling you for a fact that I know of a scheme which has borrowed money and invested in property, and then it's in the process of selling that property. So once it sells, it pays the loan. And when it finishes, it will have sold at a profit and it will remain with a surplus. So schemes have that power to borrow. Many schemes don't exercise it, but they have the power to borrow. The third question was on whether a trustee who is not able to attend a meeting or who is not able to participate in the meetings of the board can appoint an alternate member. The answer is no. Trusteeship is personal. It is personal to you, and only you can exercise your rights, your responsibilities, your duties as a trustee. So unlike directorship, where the State Corporations Act provides that a director can nominate an alternate, trustees cannot nominate an alternate to represent them in the meetings of the board. Those are the three questions I picked. The aspect of borrowing was repeated twice. I think I've clarified it. We can take another round of questions, Aurelia.
All right. Thank you so much, Calvin, for addressing that. I hope the guys who had asked the questions have been addressed correctly. So there's another question from Paul Choge, is asking you to explain in detail the meaning of augment benefits. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Augment benefits. So you can explain that in detail. Do we have any other questions from the rest of the participants? I can see we're around 45 of us. I'm sure there's some pressing questions that need to be addressed. I can identify some very familiar names in the participant list. Jen Sang, how are you doing today?
Me.
I'm good,
You
Aurelia.
want to provide us?
Yes, I am, and I'm keenly following up on what Calvin is presenting. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, we have May Odhiambo. She was among the first participants to join us for today's webinar. Are you still with us? I'm beginning to think we are very few of us in this webinar. Or let's assume that we are following closely on what Calvin is saying. And he's such a good teacher, so there are no questions coming up. All right. So Calvin, I think because of time.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a hand raised. I can see from my end. Just a minute. There's a hand raised from Simon Sunday. Simon, you can take it over.
Thank you very much for this discussion. I think we are heading somewhere. There's a lot that we have learned, but my question is that does a CEO of an institution automatically becomes a member of board of trustees?
All right.
Thank you for the question, Michael.
Okay. That is Simon Sunday. Okay, so he's noted that down. He'll be addressing it shortly. Do we have any more questions from the rest of the team? All right. I think, Mr. Calvin, you can proceed. If there's anything pressing, I'll let you know.
All right. Thank you very much. Let me respond to those two useful questions that have come up. Let me start with the first one. The first one is to clarify further what I mean by augmentation of benefits. Now, the simple way to explain it is what I had said earlier on, that if you use a formula and the formula is the number of years I've worked times my salary at the point of exit times a pension factor, and for example, it would be 1/480. If you use that formula in a DB scheme, it will help you calculate how much I can get today. So, and you can do it for yourself. Let's take 1/480 times the number of years worked times the salary. So if you earn 100,000, put 100,000. How many years have you worked? Times 1/480. You can calculate your own pension. Now, if we get that my pension out of that is 10 million shillings, but the scheme is being wound up, and if the scheme is being wound up, it is found that it has additional funds as a surplus in the scheme. Is it possible for the scheme to give the members some of the money and refund the sponsor some of the money? The answer is yes. Now, when you're being given some of the surplus, you don't deserve it. You can't demand it as a right because you've already been given what was promised. But the trustees, they have a power to add you more than you deserve or that you were promised. And that is what we are calling benefit augmentation. To augment is to increase, to make more, to build, to augment. And so that's what it is. It's benefit augmentation, meaning the trustees have discretion to pay you more than you are entitled to if the scheme has a surplus and it is being wound up. And the same right they have to give you a surplus is also the same right the sponsor has to ask for part of that surplus to be refunded back to them, because they're the ones who also contributed to bring the scheme to a surplus. So that is what benefit augmentation is. The second question, and thank you very much for the question, is the CEO an automatic member of the Board of Trustees? The answer is no. There are no automatic members in a Board of Trustees. It is usual to find that the head of HR is one of those nominated by the sponsor, and also to find that the CEO is one of those nominated by the sponsor. But there's nothing automatic about it. I have seen in many schemes, and I see it in some, where the sponsor has nominated different people other than the CEO to be their nominated representatives in the Board of Trustees. So no, it is not always automatic. Some of the largest schemes have CEOs, some of them don't have. All right? So bottom line, what I'm saying is, it is the board of directors of the organization, the sponsor, who would determine who then becomes a trustee. It is very usual to see CEOs, but it's not automatic, it's not a right. It is the way it is exercised by the board of directors of the organization, of the sponsor. All right. Let's now move forward and talk about delegation.
Calvin, before you proceed, there's
Yes.
another question from the chat box. So James Obonyo is asking, what are the investment limits when it comes to the retirement contributions? What are the investment limits when it comes to the retirement contributions? So maybe you can address that first and then you proceed. But there's another one as well from Sendeo. What is your opinion with regard to the sponsor CEO being a beauty member? I think that's a very interesting question. Yeah, from Sendeo.
All right.
All right, you can proceed.
Thank you very much for those two questions. It is easy for me to start with the second one. And so we've said it depends on whether the sponsor has nominated the CEO or not. Their membership is not automatic. And there are many large schemes, small schemes, which do or do not have the CEO as a sponsor. But what are my thoughts about the CEO's membership in the Board of Trustees? Before I give you my thoughts, let me tell you what the law says. The Retirement Benefits Occupational Regulations say the CEO and the chairman of the or board member may be nominated to the Board of Trustees. They may be nominated to the Board of Trustees depending on the sponsor. But once nominated to the Board of Trustees, they cannot take over the chairmanship or the leadership of the Board of Trustees. So the chairman of the board cannot be the chairman of the BOT. The CEO cannot be the chairman of the BOT. The law specifically denies them that opportunity to take over the leadership of the Board of Trustees. So in answering your question, perhaps we need to say, why are they allowed to be on the board? Allowed to take over the chairmanship of the board? The answer is simple. They are allowed because sometimes they are also members of the scheme. They're allowed because their participation in the scheme can be very useful to the scheme. If you have a supportive CEO who listens to the problems of the scheme, whether it is funding, whether it's a deficit, whether it's late contributions, whatever the problem, if you have a good CEO who sits there and listens to the issues, who is sympathetic to the cause of the scheme, they can do a lot to try and bridge that gap. So they can assist the scheme in a big way by agitating for funds, by making sure funds are remitted on time, by making sure that the terms in the scheme, the contribution rates are the best, that the money is well invested, and things like those. So their role is very useful because they come in with some power, with some authority, being the CEO of the sponsor. But it is a double-edged sword which can also be used to silence other members on the Board of Trustees. It is a double-edged sword which can be used to stymie free conversation within the board and to explore alternatives openly. And that is why they are prevented from assuming any leadership role so that they can only be on the board but not on the leadership of the board. What do I think about it? I think they are useful to have on the board, but with the limitations that have been provided by that law. I was instrumental during my time at the Retirement Benefits Authority in making sure that that regulation came as it is. Over the years, there have been additional amendments to the occupational scheme regulations, and in particular, regulations which were done 2 years ago in 2021, which provided that before a trustee can be removed from the board, there has to be good reason and there has to be a resolution, a formal resolution of the sponsor for a trustee to be removed from the pension scheme. Why? Because it was realized that you need to protect the trustees for them to be able to act freely and fairly in favor of the scheme and its membership. All right, so those are my quick thoughts on that. Now, finally, on the investment limits, I may not be able to give you all the limits off the top of my head, but I can quickly tell you that if you go into the retirement benefits occupational scheme regulations, and these things are available online, you just go to Google and you type the Retirement Benefits Act and regulations. If you go to the occupational scheme regulations, there's a table called Table G. If you go to Table G, it will tell you you're allowed to invest in government securities. And it tells you the limit that you can put in government securities as a percentage. And the percentage is 90%. So you can put up to 90% of your scheme assets in government securities. Number two, you're allowed to put up to 70% of your scheme assets in what? Shares. So Nairobi Stock Exchange, Uganda Stock Exchange, Dar es Salaam. So East Africa, you're allowed to put up to 70% of your benefits in stocks. Now, you're allowed to put up to 30% in property, land, and housing, and that kind of thing. You're allowed to put up to 10% in infrastructure. You're allowed to put 5% in any other investment. You're allowed to put up to 10% in private equity. You're allowed to put up to 10%, sorry, 5% in offshore, where you invest out of the country, outside of East Africa. So off the top of my head, I can tell you just a few of those. But there are many investment classes, and they have different limits, and I've guided you where you can actually get Table G and look at it. So it gives you a list of the places you can invest and the limits in terms of how you can invest. If you have a more specific question beyond that, I'm more than happy to respond to it later on. All right, so I want to shift gears and we talk about delegation. And what is to delegate? To delegate is to ask or to give someone else to execute a task for you. Remember, I said you can delegate a duty, but you can't delegate the responsibility. And so how can you exercise or how can you delegate? First, you can only delegate as provided for either in law or under the trusted and rules. You can only delegate that which you've been allowed to delegate. Number two, why are you delegating? You're delegating because either you don't have the time or you don't have the expertise. So the reason why you hire an auditor to do for you an audit is because you don't have the expertise or the time to do the audit yourself. And a third party brings in an independent viewpoint. So those are some of the reasons why you delegate. Number three is because you don't have the professional wherewithal to be able to do what that person you're delegating to does. An actuary, you can't do the work of an actuary because you're not an actuary. You're not an auditor, you're not an administrator, you're not a fund manager, you're not a custodian, you're not a lawyer. Whatever it is you're delegating to someone to do, you're delegating because they bring a professional skill which you may not have. And even if you had, you're probably not the best person to do it at arm's length. And that's why you delegate it to someone else. So you're allowed to delegate, but in terms of accountability, it is your responsibility to make sure that the duty you've delegated is being done and being done correctly. Now, let's talk about compliance a little bit. And we want to talk about what are you complying with? You're complying with the law. You're complying with the regulations, which we are calling the rules. You're complying with the scheme policies. You're complying with the standards. And you are basically meant to be 100% compliance in terms of the standing of the scheme. For greater information about areas of compliance, and you don't want to look at the Act and its regulations, I can invite you to look at the good governance guidelines issued and published by RBA in 2018. They have a raft of areas on taxation, on filing of returns, on scheme governance audits, on board evaluation. Those are the areas where you must be compliant. How many meetings you've held, how you've invested, is it within the limits, whether you have an investment policy statement, an IPS. Those are the questions that you will be asking when you're answering the question, are you compliant or not? Now, what does compliant essentially entail? You're properly registered as a scheme, and you're registered not only with RBA, but you're also registered with the Commissioner of Tax, Kenya Revenue Authority. Number two, you have a current investment policy statement. It can only be for a period of 3 years. And you have an investment policy statement that is valid for that period. As soon as it expires, you develop another one. You have a current and up-to-date trust deed and rules. The trust deed and rules has been revised to incorporate all recent amendments. Tax, that you're compliant in terms of payment of tax, and that you're efficient in the manner in which you address your tax responsibilities. That you're free from any governance mismanagement. You don't have debts, you don't have, you're not mismanaging, there are no issues of fraud, there are no issues of conflict of interest, among others. And then finally, in terms of timeliness within which you file your audited accounts, you file your quarterly returns, you remit your unclaimed assets to the unclaimed assets authorities by 1st of November every year. Those are some of the aspects about compliance that you must make sure that you are compliant. Now, the last one I've mentioned tends to raise many questions among trustees. What do I mean? That the trustees have an obligation to remit unclaimed assets to the Unclaimed Assets Financial Authority every year. Now, if you need to look at the provisions of the Unclaimed Financial Assets Act, it provides that assets which are being managed by a trustee on behalf of a beneficiary, if they are not claimed within a period of 2 years from when they become due, meaning from the date they are triggered, then you should remit those assets after a period of 2 years to the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority. It is that authority that then will have a responsibility to try and find the beneficiaries and reunite them with those assets. On your own, during that period of 2 years, you have an obligation to find the member or to find the beneficiary and reunite them or give them their assets. But if you fail to, within a period of 2 years, you're meant to transfer those assets to the Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority. This is a contentious point. We have had discussions with RBA, and more needs to be said and done about it. And I believe we will be seeing something in due course. But yes, that is the position on unclaimed financial assets, if they are unclaimed after 2 years from when they become due. All right, let me continue to what is it if you did, you would be responsible for breaching a trust. Now, if you engaged in what the authority considers misconduct or what is defined under the Act as misconduct, you would be in breach. If you didn't administer the scheme properly, you would be responsible for maladministration of the scheme and therefore removal as a board of trustee or as an individual trustee. If you fail to carry your duties, you fail to collect remittances, you fail to pay taxes, you fail to pay your members, all those are failure to carry out your trusteeship. If you do something outside of the powers, so you do something not allowed under the powers, if you invest money in unauthorized investments, at one point we saw one of the biggest schemes investing in what was considered a non-beneficial investment in a quarry. It's not authorized and it was not done with the due diligence that is expected. And therefore, you can be in breach of trust by doing so. By manipulating benefits, by not paying people the right amount, by negligently allowing trust property into a third party's hand or into one of the trustees' hands, or paying the wrong person, or failure to exercise discretion properly amounts to breach of trust. Now, I want to close the conversation by answering the following aspects. One is the role static or is the role evolving? Is the role changing or are we still the same? I don't know whether you agree with the image on your screen, whether human beings are evolving or we are regressing. I'm not sure, but it remains to be seen. So let's answer the question about trustees' responsibilities. Are they changing or are they the same? In the same line that we've been having this conversation, you have a number of duties which you must discharge. The law does not distinguish between those who are active and those who are passive. If you're a trustee, you're a trustee, and therefore you have an obligation to execute. And if the failure by commission or omission leads to loss, then you may be answerable to those losses. And you're answerable either individually or jointly. And that's why we say it's jointly and severally, either by yourself as an individual or together as a group. Now, what are some of the best practices that today we can say you need to pick up? And I like what Godwin Simba talked about in terms of technology, and I will be finishing my discussion with that comment. Some of the best practices are to make sure that your scheme is well designed. The current thinking is to move away from defined benefit schemes into defined contribution schemes. I do not think today that the Retirement Benefits Authority is registering any defined contribution schemes. Why? Because they are expensive to run and sponsors are running away from them. And therefore, you must make sure that you have a good scheme design. Number two, one of the biggest complaints that you will ever get from your membership is as far as communication is concerned. They have not been told what their benefits are. They have not been told what their returns are. They have not been told what challenges the scheme is facing and how it's addressing those challenges. So one of the things that you must invest, and you need to do that in the form of a policy, in the form of a strategy, is on communication. And basically, I would recommend that you identify all your stakeholders and put in place a strategy for stakeholder management. And one of the key stakeholders to the scheme are your members and your beneficiaries, and how you communicate with them. Number two, put in place mutually beneficial relationship with your service providers and scheme advisors. So make sure you have contracts, make sure you retain them competitively, make sure you pay them in good time, make sure you have the best in the market to give you the best advice. Optimal investment strategies. So one of you asked what are the limits. So once you've understood the limits, you still go ahead and you develop an investment policy statement. That investment policy gives you not only the tactical range, but the legal maximum. So you need to use your tactical range when you're investing. What is it we want to be in, and why do we want to be in it, and up to what proportion? Now, decision-making within the trustees has to be rigorous, have to be robust and well thought out. I want to ask you a question, and I don't expect an answer. In your board of trustee meetings, what takes the bulk of your time? Is it routine operational compliance issues, or is it forward-looking strategic discussions? If you look at reports of what happened in the last quarter, in the last year, all the time, and you don't look at what do we need to do in the future in order to close the gap, in order to get better returns, then you're focusing on the wrong things. You need to have a rigorous trustee decision-making process that is strategic rather than operational. You need to focus on your members and the sponsor and their beneficiaries. Now, the sponsor contributes, the sponsor set up the scheme, you must think about them. But the members are the owners of the assets in the scheme, together with their beneficiaries, you must think about them and how to take care of them in a beneficial way. And then use an outcome-based approach to deal with issues within the board. What is outcome? Avoid input. Avoid saying, but we met. Avoid saying, but we gave you. It is, so if you met, what came out of it? So apply an outcome-based approach in running the fund as opposed to an input. We did this, we met, we qualified, we complied. Yes, you may have done all that, but is the member any better at the end of the day than they were before your actions? Additional things that can be done is balanced portfolio. Make sure you do, make sure you invest in different asset classes and diversify so that if one class doesn't do well, then the scheme still does okay because it has been pulled up by the other investment classes. For example, the stock market is doing terribly. Many elements of the market are not doing very well. So at the moment, things like government bonds, things like property can show up the scheme when the rest of the market is not doing well in a well-diversified scheme. Encouraging additional voluntary contributions and encouraging members to have alternative pension arrangements. Very, very useful because it means that the members are then set for retirement when the time comes. Competitively affecting any capital opportunities. If you have some money in the scheme and you need to invest, you have to do highest best use analysis before you invest in it. Let me finish off by now talking about technology within the scheme. Now, when I talk about technology, what do I have in mind? Let me start at a very simple level. At a very simple level, we are leveraging on technology this afternoon to be able to do our learning, to be able to do our interaction. Are you leveraging on technology when it comes to holding your AGMs, holding your member education, holding your workshops? Are you leveraging on technology? So functions like the one we have today, where we're on a Zoom call, on a Microsoft Teams call, Jeans call, whatever it is, please leverage on technology to be able to hold your meetings and to be able to reach out to your members and to be able to give your members the information that they need. Number two, email. A lot of information can now be communicated very quickly, very easily, and you can get feedback on email. Bulk SMSs. If you want a message to go out to your members, you send it out on a bulk SMS because you already have a database of all their numbers. Websites. Does your scheme have a website? And does that website have the relevant information that the members need? Do you have a member engagement portal on your scheme website? Can a member log in and check how much their scheme balance is? Can a member log in and do certain self-services? You can use technology in terms of USSD. If I wanted to contribute an extra amount to the scheme, do I have to do a check? Do I have to go to the bank? Or can I simply get the account number and do a USSD transaction or do an M-Pesa to the scheme and the money goes into my account as additional voluntary contribution within the comfort of my convenience or my home or whatever it is. Some service providers have now developed apps. You log into the app and you can see your benefits. You log into the app and you can see the investments that are taking place. Has your scheme leveraged on technology? Maybe you're asking the question, why should we leverage on technology? Because you want to do things conveniently at your own time, at your own pace, at your own place. So self-service. Number two, the scheme needs to manage its costs. What's the cost of holding a physical AGM for 1,000 people and the cost of holding the same AGM virtually? You can't even compare. It's less than 5% of the original cost of holding a physical AGM. Better record keeping, more efficient reporting, and better communication and engagement. So leverage on technology. I'm not saying do away with physical meetings. I'm not saying do away with physical records, but while you have that, leverage and utilize technology to the best possible effect within the scheme. You may still have to have physical meetings with the members if they find those to be more satisfactory for one reason or another. Now, so specific areas where you can leverage on, I think we've talked about them. Use the technology to address those aspects. As I conclude, the question is, what are some of the challenges that trustees face, and how can those challenges be addressed? Remuneration and allowances is one of the issues. Most schemes do not necessarily pay very well. There's a token amount you get, and you're expected to serve your board as best as you can within that framework. It's not remuneration per se, it's not pay per se, it's not compensation, it's just being facilitated to sit on the board and to make the decisions that are required. Can this be improved? I think the authority is looking into it. If you go to the RBA website and you look for templates, you will see a template of a remuneration guideline. And in that remuneration guideline, I think they are talking about 20,000 shillings for a start. Now, it has not been formally issued, but it's there as a guide. The second thing where trustees face challenges is in decision making. Now, you must make sure that you have a good understanding of governance, you have a good board charter, you have a code of conduct that guides your conduct within the board, and that you make sure you have good, robust decision-making mechanisms on the board as you engage as trustees before you make decisions affecting your members. Make sure, in terms of compliance, you're always 100% compliance. If there's any reason why, which is dragging you down, please address it. Now, you have to make sure that you always follow up on changes in legislation, and you incorporate them within your activities, within your trustee and rules, within your policies, among other things. You must improve on record keeping. A lot of schemes struggle, or they actually don't have any records. The records are with the service providers. I think it is useful to augment the service providers' records by having your own scheme records where necessary. Particularly the employment aspects of your records. When did a member join the scheme? When were they employed? How much was their pay? How much did they contribute? Those are records you may need to have as schemes. Investment decisions. You have to test and make the best possible investment decisions that you can make. And you have to test them, you have to engage, you have to compare with other investments, both long-term and short-term. You have to be long-term oriented in your investment approach, among other things. And make sure you act in the best interest of the scheme. You have to always identify who are your stakeholders and what are their expectations from you, and then have a good stakeholder management approach. Communication with members, key. Taxation, make sure you get good advice on taxation and you stick to those good practices in terms of taxation. Just to bring it to your information, 2 years ago, the National Treasury presented a proposal to Parliament to effect tax for even people who are over the age of 65. And why was this coming up? Because previously, people who are the age of 65 and above receive their retirement payments without taxation. Either the 1/3 that you take as a cash lump sum or the monthly pay. And then this proposal was introduced, being pushed by the taxing master. And it didn't go through Parliament because it was rejected, but somehow it found its way into the finance bill for 2022. And it became law in January. Now, what they were doing was taxing the 1/3 that you access and then not taxing the monthly pension. The ARBS, the Association of Retirement Benefit Schemes, and APTAC went to court and managed to get court orders stopping that taxation for people over the age of 65 until the case is heard and determined. So the case is pending in court. It has not been determined, but for now, the taxation of people who are accessing their benefits after the age of 65 has been stopped. Now, other challenges are to do with paying the right people. How do you make sure that you're paying the right person? You insist on regular updating of trustee of member nomination forms. What about member apathy, where members, you hold an AGM and out of 5,000 employees, only 100 come? How do you deal with that member apathy and indifference? I think you continue sensitizing them. You continue showing them why it is important, and maybe throw in some incentives which can make them come and participate in the meeting. You realize people who then take a very keen interest after or just before they are about to retire. I wish this could be translated to the younger group within the organization. Fraud and tampering of documents, you have to be very careful as trustees with your titles, with your other aspects. Now, staff mobility. Employees nowadays, unlike in the days gone, do not stay with one employer for very long. They come in, stay for 3 years, they move on to the next thing. Now, that mobility has an effect on their retirement benefit arrangement. How do you make sure that they can still contribute wherever they are, but also that they do not access benefits and reduce them? And then trustee availability and time management. Some trustees are very busy and getting the time becomes a challenge, but you have to create scheme policies that will guide you in what you do. I finished the discussion by talking about liability, and generally speaking, if you act with diligence, if you act with necessary authority, if you act in the best interest and only do the things which you're authorized to do, then you are generally speaking not going to be liable for any issues within the scheme. But if you act out of your duty, act in conflict with your responsibilities, do not exercise due skill and diligence and regard and care, if you do things which you've not been authorized to do, then you expose yourself to trustee liability, either at an individual level or as a group. And so it is important that you map out what liability there may be, and you take steps to cover yourself from that liability. What are some of the things that you can do? One is the due diligence defense, which means I did what any good trustee would have done. Number two, a professional indemnity insurance. And number three, only act where you have authority to act and act in the best interest of the scheme. How to limit exposure? Always take professional advice where you're dealing with technical skills. Act in accordance with your mandate. Act with due care and skill. Be reasonable. Have the requisite documentation in place as you undertake your trustee action. Supervision has increased. Your disclosure requirements has also increased. There is now additional requirements to disclose on your annual financial statements. Additional requirements to members. There's an obligation to whistleblow. There's an obligation to pay penalties where you have not paid them in good time. I want to stop there. And I am happy to take a couple of more questions, and then we can call it a day. Over to you, Aurelia. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Calvin, for that great presentation. So before we conclude, there are some questions that came up, but there's been a hand up from Otiato Wafula. Maybe you can address that first before I read out the rest of the questions. Mr. Otiato, you can.
Thank you very much, Aurelia, and thank you very much, the presenter, for that wealth of knowledge. My concern is on this topic, investment decisions. As you have alluded to, the stock exchange is doing very badly. So I just want your opinion on this. Will you advise schemes to go for hybrid investment, where we have the two types of fund managers, one who have the so-called guaranteed return and the one which is free? And then as you answer, you should also advise us on what are the advantages of these hybrid, and specifically the advantages or disadvantages of hybrid, of guaranteed investment fund managers. Thank you very much.
All right, we can take more questions.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Otiato, for that question. So proceeding to the chat box. We have a question from Sendeo. Sendeo, you've been very engaging, so I hope the rest can also do that. So there's a school of thought claiming that assets in a pension scheme do not form part of unclaimed assets, since there's always an owner, that's a legal owner in case the beneficial owner is not traceable. So Calvin, what is your opinion on the above? Will you need me to repeat that, or you've gotten me to read?
I'm good.
That's okay. All right. Okay. So do we have any more questions, so that when Calvin addresses the ones already stated, he can just take over the rest? Any more questions, comments? I know it's around lunch hour, but I'm sure those 10 minutes won't hurt. You can ask a few questions and then we wrap it up. All right. So we have another question from James Obonyo. Actually, two questions. So he's asking, what are the developments so far on use of pension to take out mortgages? And another general question is, what have been the red tapes for civil servants having an issue accessing their pension? All right, thank you so much, James, for that. Any other question? I can say, well, I think that was not a question. Yeah, so Walter Njoroge, are you still with us?
Then you need to communicate that. You need to communicate that.
Okay. All right, Calvin, you can proceed, and then I'll tell you about the rest.
All right, thank you very much. So let me take those three questions. Let me start with the mortgage question. What are the developments as far as the mortgage aspects are concerned? Now, in 2009, the first set of mortgage regulations were developed. They allowed you to take up to 60% of your retirement benefits and use it as a security to access a facility, or use it as a guarantee that in the event you are unable to pay, it would come through. Now, it didn't allow any money to leave the scheme. It was simply used as a guarantee. Now, That 2009 regulation, called the Mortgage Regulations 2009, is still in place. It is well underlined. So you can still use your retirement benefits. Your total accumulated funds, 60% of them, you can use them to secure funds which you're taking from a financial institution or any other place for purposes of developing or buying a property. In 2020, the National Treasury gazetted the 2020 mortgage regulations. The 2020 mortgage regulations provided that you can actually take up to 40% of your total accumulated benefits within the scheme and use them to buy property. So if you had 10 million, you can take up to 4 million and use it to buy a piece of property. You can take money from the scheme. Those regulations were subsequently challenged, and in a decision dated last year, were set aside by the High Court. So those regulations are no longer in effect. And as we speak today, you cannot exercise the option of taking up to 40% of your benefits out of the scheme to buy property. Why? Because the High Court set aside those regulations. Now, so what then remains is the 2009 regulations, which allowed for securing up to 60% using your benefits. But I am fully aware that as we speak, there are engagements going on within different government quarters, which are trying to find a workable formula that would come back as a different enhanced form of mortgage regulations. So there are discussions to address what were the shortcomings of the previous ones and what can be made to improve them, and then have a robust public participation before they are adopted to continue. So that is, I've given you what is there and what I know for sure will be coming. The second question is from Sendeo, which is, there's a school of thought that thinks that retirement benefits should not be remitted to unclaimed financial assets. Personally, I would like to belong to that school of thought, but my thoughts are different from what the law requires. So as we speak now, my thoughts are not important. The law requires that benefits that are held on behalf of a beneficiary, if you try to trace the beneficiary within a period of 2 years and you don't succeed, then you need to remit them to RBA. Sorry, to unclaimed financial assets. Now, I recently spoke in a conference organized by the Association of Pension Administrators of Kenya, where I challenged the RBA to do more in terms of sensitizing the members and sensitizing the trustees on what to do with retirement benefits who they have not been able to trace the lawful owners. I think they are doing something about it. There will be some communication that will soon come out. And also, they need to clarify at what point do benefits become unclaimed. And that's why I talked about what triggers it. Now, as long as you have not reached retirement age, your benefits are not unclaimed. And even after you've reached retirement age, and you say, I want to leave my benefits to over 65 or over 70 or whatever age you retired, your benefits are still not unclaimed. If today at the age of 40, you leave your employer and you move to another employer and you leave your benefits in your scheme, until you reach retirement age and the benefits become due and payable, they are not unclaimed. And it doesn't matter how many years go by. It is only when they are triggered, either because you've asked for them or you've reached retirement age or early retirement age, or whatever it is that triggers, and RBA needs to spell out what are the triggers. So once they are triggered, then from 2 years from the date of the trigger, they then become unclaimed assets. Unfortunately, that's the law. We may not like it, but that's where we stand. Maybe we missed an opportunity during the legislative making process for us to agitate that benefits be left out of that regime. Finally, on civil servants and why there are delays, tongue in cheek, I will say this. Apparently, it's not just civil servants whose pension delays, also those who are in service, it is now commonplace to see delays in salaries. So, but the reason is the same. The government pays, I think, over 18 billion shillings in pension. Now, sometimes we, as a country, we are not liquid enough to take care of this. And then the second issue is poor member records, which affect the administration of retirement benefits. And number three is just a lethargy and some legacy issues within that aspect. But I'm sure as we speak today, my recent experience is that there are significant changes that have taken place even at the Treasury as it administers pension. And to obviate that challenge, the government, effective 1st January last year, started contributing into a defined contribution scheme called the Civil Service Superannuation Scheme. As of last check, they had in 1 year over 45 billion in retirement benefits belonging to people within the public service, civil servants. I believe as a retirement benefit scheme, which is defined contribution, it will be very straightforward to make pension payments to those of its members who have contributed. They are contributory both by the sponsor, who is the government, and also by the members. So I think those legacy challenges may still be there, but they are slowly being addressed, and they, in good time, they'll be a thing of the past. That's all I wish to say on that in that regard. Aurelia, I think we've done past our time. I hand over back to you to consider if we can close at this stage. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed listening to your questions, trying to address them, and being of use in the presentation to you. Thank you very much, and have a blessed day.
All right. Thank you so much, Calvin, for that impeccable presentation. So there are not any other questions in the chat box, but in case of
Excuse
anything,
me,
you can.
Aurelia.
All right. Yes.
There was a question on hybrid fund managers where you have one with a guaranteed staff.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
Okay.
Sorry, my apologies on that. Let me just quickly respond to that. Now, so from my discussion, I said it's very important for the scheme to diversify. Why? Because when one is doing badly, the other one supports you. So diversification is very, very key. And if you diversify well, generally your performance may not always be the top, but it will always be above average. It will be good. Now, there are two options. You can go into a guaranteed fund or you can go into a diversified fund. Now, I hear your question to be, is it good to be in both a diversified scheme and also guaranteed, so that the guaranteed one cushions you in the event that the market doesn't do very well? I have a different opinion from that. My opinion is that guaranteed funds are only good for small schemes which do not want to incur the cost of investment. And therefore, any scheme above 1 billion shillings in total assets should be in a diversified arrangement, where you do the investment yourself with the advice of the fund manager, and you make the calls, you make the decisions as a board with the advice of the fund manager, or you allow the fund manager to get your concurrence to make the investments as they deem fit. Guaranteed funds are only good for small schemes, and their returns, while they may always be consistent, are never that attractive. Because no one can guarantee you more than the market can make. And so they're very careful how much they can guarantee you. The typical guarantee is between 5 and 7%. Now, in a good year, the pension scheme can make up to 25, 27, 30% return. But in a bad year, it can make a 0% return or a -5. But in a diversified scheme, while it has its ups and downs from year to year, if you look at the trend overall, it is always on an upward growth if you do good investment. So I would still say keep investing in a diversified arrangement. Just make sure you have a very close eye on scheme investments and what is happening, and only smaller starting schemes that are starting out should be considering investing in guaranteed funds. Thank you very much, sir. Aurelia, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nyachoti. I hope that question has been answered correctly, Mr. Otiato.
My concern will be, does it mean that if you're in a guaranteed scheme of, let's say, 5%, if that fund manager makes 9%, the guaranteed 5% is a maximum, is not a minimum?
The guaranteed 5% is what they will give you as a guarantee. Now, it is up to them to think whether they will give you any portion of the remaining 4% that they have made. So it's not guaranteed. They will start by giving you 5%, but because they're in a competitive market, they may decide to give you 1% above 5, or 2, or 3. But usually you will divide between yourself and them, and then they also keep some money for reserves for the bad years. So first they give you the guaranteed amount, and then maybe a percentage or 2 above that guaranteed amount, so that you don't move to the competition. But that 5% is the minimum. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. I think that is now more clear. So once again, thank you, Nyachoti. It was a pleasure having you on board. I'm sure you've addressed the topical areas very well. And I believe this was a very timely training because we have quite a number of new trustees on board. So they must have benefited from the knowledge that you've shared with us. So I like how you brought about the issue on technology. It's timely as well because we are currently organizing our 2nd annual Pension Technology and Innovation Conference. So we will share the details with the members who just joined us. Maybe once you attend, you'll be able to now understand how, as a pension scheme, you can implement the technology trends and how we can just use that information to better our pension scheme. Okay. So, all right. So as I mentioned earlier, we will share the training slides and the recording. Though I was hoping maybe Mr. Nyachoti, you can share your contacts as well. So if there's any other question or engagement, they can always contact you directly. I hope that's fine. All right.
That is quite in order. I will put it on the chat function.
Okay. So maybe just to conclude, there's a quote that goes with failure is success in progress. So I hope whatever Mr. Nyachoti and Godwin Simba have addressed, you can now use it to, advance the way you do your roles as a trustee, and at least you can better your pension scheme in one way or another. So Mr. Godwin, I can see is still with us. So unless you have anything to say, and we can officially finalize this webinar. Godwin Simbaru with us?
Yes, thank you very much, Aurelia, and thank you, Calvin. That was an insightful presentation. And it's our hope that it will go a long way in terms of enhancing the knowledge and the experience of the trustees as they set their journey towards trusteeship. We want to commit that as FINET, we should be able to roll out continuous engagements Be on the lookout for our training calendars, where we have specified different training programs. And as Aurelia has mentioned, the same may be shared to you on email. And for any other engagements, be it consultations beyond this forum, we are always available to engage with you. We thank you very much, and we wish you the best of the remaining of the day and a good holiday tomorrow. Thank you very much, Calvin, once again, and Aurelia for this grateful session. And to everyone there, kwaheri sana and bye-bye.
All right, thank you, Godwin, for that. Maybe we can turn on our cameras and just, we get to see who was in the room as we log out. Okay, there's a way we normally appreciate our speakers in a virtual setup. Just turn on your mic and just do like one clap so that Calvin can at least feel appreciated for the good work done. All right. I think most people have gone out for lunch, but thank you for all who stuck from morning to end. I can see people are preparing to clap. Anyway, yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful rest of your day. Asante sana, Calvin and the rest. You can log out. All right.